Review, a daily program that delves into the latest and most significant economic stories. From stock markets to currency news, Business Review covers the most up-to-date stories in the global financial world.
Oil prices plunged about 10% Friday after a proposal by major oil producers at OPEC to cut output collapsed. The plan had been intended to keep oil prices steady despite the hit to demand as the coronavirus slows travel, manufacturing, and global supply chains. Russia declined to participate with talks resulting in no deal to downsize oil production. The result triggered some of the biggest falls in prices in more than 5 years.
We decided to recommend to the OPEC and non-OPEC meeting tomorrow 1.5 million barrel new cut for the second quarter of 2020 and subject to the exception of the non-OPEC member countries for cutting 500,000 barrels per day.
The Gulf region is already struggling to cope with decreasing oil revenues as the public health crisis paralyzes economic giant China, the world's biggest oil importer and buyer of Gulf oil. Paris-based economics said the spread of the new coronavirus had prompted it to lower its Middle East 2020 growth forecast by 0.5% to 2%.
There is plenty of oil production in the Gulf, where 90% of the exports in these countries come from oil production. And if you want to study the characteristic of these countries, they are small in size and have difficulty to find alternative source of production. Kuwait has a lot of difficulties handling production on its own. Kuwait also could invest in London or Paris.
Oil exporters group OPEC was pushing for an additional 1.5 million barrels per day of cuts, which would have reduced production by about 3.6% of the world's total supply. Non-OPEC states such as Russia had been expected to contribute to 500,000 barrels to the overall extra cut, OPEC ministers said. Oil prices have already tumbled about 30% since the start of the year.
This has been Farah Al-Hashim reporting for the Business Review, KTV2, Paris.
The head of the European Commission said European Union businesses are key for the bloc to make its transition to a green and digital economy. Ursula von der Leyen also urged companies to rethink business models to make them more sustainable. Speaking at a conference of Business Europe, the organization representing European businesses, von der Leyen noted the EU imported half of its raw materials, making firms dependent on outside suppliers and exposed to price fluctuations. The imports, she said, also undermined the competitiveness and sovereignty of Europe because unforeseen developments such as the coronavirus outbreak disrupt global supply chains that are highly dependent on Chinese manufacturers.
OPEC ministers are expected to approve the outlines of a deal for a significant cut in oil production to shore up prices hammered by the coronavirus outbreak, but they are still waiting for Russia to indicate whether it will back such a move. Saudi Arabia wants OPEC and its allies, including Russia, to cut 1 million to 1.5 million barrels per day for the second quarter and to keep existing cuts of 2.1 million barrels per day, which expires this month, in place until the end of 2020. But Riyadh, the biggest producer in the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and other members of the group, have yet to win Russian support for such a deal. So far, Moscow has indicated it would back an extension, but not a deeper cut. OPEC sources have signaled that preliminary talks with Russia this week in Vienna have been trickier than before. The slide in oil prices to about $51 a barrel has made it tough for OPEC states to balance their budgets, while Moscow has said it can cope with current prices.
An industry body warned the coronavirus epidemic could rob passenger airlines of up to $113 billion in revenue this year, more than 3 times a projection it made just 2 weeks ago, as the virus continues to spread around the world. The warning from the International Air Transport Association, or the IATA, came as British regional carrier Flybe became the first big casualty of the slump in travel demand due to the crisis. Norwegian Air also scraped its profit forecast for 2020, while US budget carrier Southwest predicted a $200 to $300 million hit to its first quarter operating revenues. Airlines across the globe are rushing to cut flights and costs and warning of a hit to earnings as a new virus that started in China spreads, raising fears of a pandemic that could plunge the global economy into recession. In a sign of the difficulties this is creating for airlines, a Turkish Airlines jet was flown back to Istanbul without any passenger who had arrived on the same plane tested positive for the virus. The IATA projected the hit to passenger airlines in lost revenue from the crisis could be anywhere between $63 billion and $113 billion this year, depending on the virus's progression. On February 20th, it had forecast a hit of $29 billion. The latest estimates equate to a drop of between 11 and 19% compared with its 2020 industry revenue forecast in December. The IATA said its lower forecast was based on the virus being contained in current markets with over 100 cases as of March 2nd, while the higher estimate was based on a broader epidemic. Both scenarios assume there will be a recovery by late summer. The COVID-19 virus has killed more than 3,000 people and infected tens of thousands more, mostly in China, but it has now spread to more than 60 other countries, leading to travel and other restrictions. South Korea, Italy and Iran have been particularly badly affected. Germany, Japan, France, Spain, the United States, Singapore and Hong Kong have all reported more than 100 cases. Among the latest events to be cancelled is the World Air Traffic Management Congress in Madrid, which had been scheduled for March 10th through 12th.
China's agriculture officials said blocked roads due to the coronavirus were the main obstacle for spring planting for farmers, as the country reported 139 new confirmed cases of the virus. The director of seed management at the ministry, Zhang Yongqi, told a news conference that Hubei province had seen the most severe problems due to virus-related lockdowns. Mainland China reported a rise in new virus cases driven by a spike in infections in Wuhan, the provincial capital of Hubei, reversing 3 straight days of declines. In total, China has reported 80,409 cases of the virus, as the finance ministry also announced that they will step up funding support for virus-hit regions.
British regional airline Flybe collapsed after a plunge in travel demand, making the long-struggling carrier one of the first big corporate casualties of the coronavirus outbreak. The failure of an airline that connects all concerns of the UK with major European destinations not only puts around 2,400 jobs at risk, but could also see some airports struggle and regional economies hit. Passengers like David Manners, whose trip to Paris with his wife was a Christmas present, showed up at Exeter Regional Airport to find the counters practically empty. Others like Robin Kent, who travelled to Exeter to a work trip with colleagues, said their 1-hour flight back home to the island of Jersey could mean hours, maybe even days of journey. Cabin crew also felt the impact of the collapse. Catherine Dunsham said the future now looked uncertain after her 13 years in Flybe have come to an abrupt end. Airlines around the world have been cancelling flights and warning of a hit to profitability after coronavirus first emerged in China, hitting flights across Asia before it spread to Europe and beyond. British Airways, EasyJet, Virgin Atlantic, Lufthansa, Norwegian Air and United Airlines are among those warning on the impact of a virus that looks set to hit the industry harder than the 2003 SARS outbreak. Flybe's collapse will also cause more problems for Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who had promised to level up Britain by investing in regional transport links. His government had agreed a rescue deal for the 41-year-old airline in January, saying it was important to maintain connections across the country for its 8 million passengers. It said there was nothing more it could do. Flybe, the largest independent regional airline in Europe, operated between 81 airports and was owned by Virgin Atlantic, Stobart Group and Saris Capital. The owners said they had plugged more than $174 million into the business in the last 14 months, including around $32 million pledged in January.
This has been Business Review, your daily source for the most critical stories in the financial world. Tune in next time for the latest financial news impacting the world economy.